welcome Stephen Morris of UKCloud, who's been working for a number of years to create great products for the UK government and other organisations, and actually has won Agile Awards in 2016 for his team for the most improved Agile team. So welcome, Stephen, and looking forward to hearing your insights on the whole process of getting Agile thinking to work.
Thank you, Andrew. Appreciate the introduction.
So to start with, I mean, one key point for customers about the cloud is the attractiveness of the flexibility it offers. And I guess that flexibility in turn must cause some headaches for a cloud services provider like you. So how do you handle that extra flexibility and the uncertainty it causes for some of your projects? What do you do with your teams?
Okay. Might be useful just for a second just to stand back a little bit and talk about, I can probably summarize the uncertainty in three key ways that we work with. So the first level of uncertainty is technology. So the technology we use, even if we're using off-the-shelf technology as part of our service, we are often using it in ways that are beyond what the manufacturer perhaps expected. So if we're using an enterprise technology and we're scaling it, for example, then often we're going into a no man's land where the tests haven't quite got there. Definitely in line with KT, the idea that a manual should be viewed with some skepticism is very clearly the case with us. And one very simple example of that, one of the orchestration tools that we use, we operate at 5% of the vendor scale guidelines. So they say that we can do 40,000 VMs, we do 2,000. And that's learned behavior, I suppose. The other two things relate to customers. The classical product development challenge of working with any customer where often requirements will change, partly because technology changes, but also as people see the development you're working on, things change. And then finally, being a cloud business, we're kind of open. So we're not in control of what our customers do on our platform. So things like capacity management and traditional IT service management stuff doesn't work in the same way. If you can go to bed and wake up the next day and there's 5,000 new VMs that have appeared on your platform, or a petabyte of storage that's appeared, if someone's managed to get that in, you're not in control. You've got to think about it differently. So there are basically, the key thing that we do in our projects and our delivery here is we don't assume that we're in control. And that's pretty much the place to start, or more specifically, that we can't predict what's going to happen. Taking that further into our projects, that's really the genesis of using Scrum in our organization, or using Agile of any kind in our organization. We intentionally start projects knowing that we're wrong, or we're going to be wrong, and that we've got to learn and adapt, and there will be uncertainty along the way. The specific thing probably to share on this call about what we do, and this is something we've developed both with ourselves and working with some third parties as well, we very specifically and actively track uncertainty in the projects that we run. So where we do track risks and issues in the same way as a normal project might, and indeed change, uncertainty relates to if we've accepted that we don't know all the answers at the beginning, we haven't done all the design at the beginning, we don't want to do all the design at the beginning because there's a likelihood that it's going to be wrong, we have to make sure that we don't lose sight of that through the project. So effectively it's the, if you think of the Donald Rumsfeld thing, yeah. These are known unknowns, things at the beginning of the project where we know that we've got to do some work. Then the magic, and the thing if we try and get it right somewhere, is to try and solve that uncertainty or think about that uncertainty at the last responsible moment. That's a phrase from Indigo Blue, one of the companies we work with, but that effectively relates to if you do too much design now, it could be a waste of money and effort. And if you do it too late, you could either stall the project or you could rush and make a poor decision. So it's a kind of tantalizing balance, but that's broadly what uncertainty means to us and what we do. We track uncertainty in an active way.
That's really useful, and thank you for invoking the classical Donald Rumsfeld quote. Let me lead you a bit further with that one and ask you, if I may, about the unknown unknowns. Sure. Is there something specific you do with your team to keep them alive to stuff that's happening, which may be bubbling under the surface and which they perhaps can notice more quickly if they take an active interest?
I suppose one of the advantages of agility and collaboration in the first place, and that's, if you think we're operating in a world of uncertainty in development anyway, the most important thing is to provide as much opportunity as possible to catch those things, to hear about them, to get a sense of it, to decide, therefore, as a team, to take action. So we'll actively do things, and that's where, for example, we're, whether it be testing on the work that we've done so far or actively talking to customers to pick things up, we will always encourage them. There are probably a couple of other techniques that we use which are more practical and help us with planning as well. If we've got a team, for example, that is certainly once they're operating a product in production and they're continuing to iterate and develop what's already there, we'll do simple techniques like blocking time. So there's kind of an operational story that runs through a sprint where we're assuming that they're going to spend some time on one of those unknown unknowns. If, of course, they don't use that time, they can pull other work into the sprint that's prioritized, and we go further than we thought. But we can kind of, there are many dials to adjust, and definitely that's one that we do use.
Grand. Thank you very much. Let's move on to the people themselves and the agile meetings or the Scrum meetings. I mean, these are highly dependent on the quality of the team and the leader themselves. What do you do to maintain your oversight of the process?
Okay, so probably related to the answer I just gave, in a sense, that it's about opportunity. You want to create lots of opportunity to hear what's going on, and not just for me. It's kind of not about me. It's about everybody in here being aware of where we're going. I think it probably breaks to 2 points to me. One is about the team in the first place. So you're absolutely right that success in Agile is dependent on the team. And the way that the team work and the way that the team are allowed to work is absolutely critical to success. So Scrum broadly is a trust-based leader kind of style. So just break that apart a little bit or unpack that a little bit. As an organization, we'll give a team a goal, let's say a launch of a product and so on and so forth. We don't need the team to come back to us and ask permission for every single thing that they do. We're trusting them to be the experts in here and produce the right answer. We have to provide the teams with enough information to make the right decisions, and that's our role. It's not making the decisions for them, it's effectively providing the space. So they're kind of, it very much is an equitable kind of collaborative approach to those things. So the people, therefore, and the way that you've got to work, you've got to have people in those teams that are willing to do that, so are engaged in the project, understand where they're going, and also have the confidence, or have been brought on to have the confidence to speak up when things are going wrong, or right for that matter, or they've got ideas. And they also need to be able to have the skill in their relative areas. Some mistakes perhaps we made early on was a little bit of a kind of assumption that, yeah, sure, everyone will get this. And we perhaps had some teams where the individuals needed a little bit more specific leadership, or we just hadn't taught them how to do some things, or they didn't know. So things fell over because of that. So that's number one, make sure your team is empowered. What I do, or what we do here to wrap around that, Scrum encourages a huge amount of regular review anyway. So there's at least a fortnightly, we typically run fortnightly sprints here, sometimes weekly, if it's particularly uncertain. But we've got a regular review in that, where we'll come together and talk about what's been achieved in the previous months, and we'll also talk, previous sprint even, and we'll also talk about how we can improve in that team. Organizationally, at a kind of program level, we also do a monthly review across the active portfolio of projects, effectively to see where they are. It really, more than anything, is an opportunity, both for visibility to see what's going on, to look for impediments, look for opportunities, and look for things that could fall over each other. And then finally, we've got a lot of other peer meetings. So Scrum of Scrums, where you've got representatives from the teams working together. We've got technical versions of that as well. So it's not just project managers, so to speak, or they're like getting in a room together. You've got the technologists doing that. And we do a quarterly super Scrum of Scrums where everybody on a project gets in a theatre, so to speak, and all of us talk about everything, which tends to be a bit of a laugh, but it's a great way to share knowledge. And if one person learns something, or we come up with one issue out of that, it was worth it. So a mixture of things, but it's about opportunity. Excuse the long answer. It's about opportunity.
No, great long answer, and I want to pick up on one bit of that, which is the bit about empowering and making sure that people are feeling that they can declare things all the time on a continuous basis. Now, working with UK government, of course, we both work with teams who are not particularly open about what they're doing because they live in what we might call blame cultures. Have you got any specific techniques of how you onboard people who are coming perhaps from government or other types of cultures to make them fit into this more empowered model?
I think probably a couple of things. We make it pretty clear at interview anyway, and we talk about this a lot at interview, or I certainly do. The ability for someone, I'm always seeking a person's ability to influence, a person's leadership competency, no matter what the role they're in. If it's a sandwich student doing a year in industry, I still want to know how they influence the world around them. So a person needs to have that kind of innately. I guess if somebody genuinely is looking for a role where they're told what to do all day, typically they're selected out at interview because that's just not going to work very well here. If people would like to and have kind of got it innately and then perhaps aren't very experienced in that way, there's probably a lot, there are a few things. There's less formal in terms of today we're going to teach you how to speak up and be noticed. Much more that we'll take people, new people will always join an existing team anyway. So they're taken under the wing of a group that are operating perhaps in that style. And as best as we can, we match people with the right kind of leaders and coaches. Coming back to that point about it being leader, there is no one in charge, so to speak, in a Scrum team. Everybody's got an opinion, everyone's got a voice. A student that joins us this week to come and do some work with us has got the same rights to speak up and talk to other people as everyone else. So I think it's because it's a bit of a cultural thing here, people are immersed in it when they join us. We definitely screen out the people who would not do it at the beginning, and we'll encourage people. Certainly if somebody had an idea and talks about it afterwards, then the typical reaction of someone in the team would be to kind of immediately tell the team or send an email to everybody to say, whoever it was who didn't speak up, and this is actually what he meant to say. As a bit of a kind of, it's okay to say that things are going wrong. A bit waffly. The main point really is, it's again opportunity, and it's okay to fail. It's okay to talk about things that are going wrong, because actually, unless you do that, you've got no opportunity to fix them.
Grand, thank you very much. Now, let me turn to customers for a moment. If you were suddenly turned into a customer and having to get the best out of UKCloud, what would you be doing? In other words, what's the advice for how can you be a really great customer that actually helps you leverage your services provider properly?
Okay. Okay, so actually some of it relates, again, to what I've just been talking about. There's probably number one is to speak up and talk. Almost every product management team that I've worked with in my career has talked about wanting more feedback, more engagement, would like an opportunity to talk to the customer base about what they're trying to do and what problems they have. So we're definitely no different to that. And if a customer phones me or or puts an idea across to us, that's gold dust. It's absolutely so valuable. So the first thing would be that really, which is to speak up. If there are things that aren't quite right, the worst that can happen, I guess, is that your idea doesn't go anywhere. But if you don't ask, you certainly won't get. Cloud providers, because this is quite a competitive space anyway, the cloud providers that aren't listening are definitely not those that are going to win, so to speak, in this space, because they're just going to lose out in the battle. There's probably from the experience, I'd also say from the environment that I've been working in and the kinds of partners and customers that we work with in a government space who are perhaps used to a little bit more of a systems integrator or a managed service approach. In our case, if we're just selling some VMs or some storage by the gigabyte or by the hour or by the minute or whatever that is, then that's very good. But that bit in between where you kind of perhaps expected that we were going to be worrying about how the actual service on the other end is being delivered, we're operating in a different paradigm to that. So probably I would advise customers to be conscious of what they're buying. not in a negative way at all, because the part of a life cycle that they're buying from a cloud provider will typically be delivered at a significantly higher standard than they can. But it's only a component part of the solution. So they must understand how the end-to-end flow of whatever value they want to provide to their customers comes out. Otherwise, assumptions are killers in this kind of space. And that's definitely, I've spoken to a number of customers where things have gone wrong, and most of it's based around assumptions about what we might do, what we were going to do, and so forth. So definitely be very clear about the life cycle.
It's a little bit like understanding how your car or your vehicle works before you buy it, and not getting to that situation of the apocryphal story where the guy bought the camper van, put it onto auto drive, and then left to make a cup of tea. Meanwhile, it crashed. So you think he thought cruise control would actually take the whole car over.
Quite right. In a very not at all. It's in a very practical example of this. So we host across multiple data centers. I had a customer escalation, a very unhappy customer because they'd had a service problem, and they had a service problem, which is fair enough. It's IT, things will break. The challenge that I received was, why didn't I fail their service, so to speak, in a classical style, over to another data center? And the truth of that is, the service they bought was a single data center service. They could have bought a second data center. They could have bought enhanced services and so on and so on and so forth. They didn't. So our operational paradigm, as much as we want to get that customer back up and running as quickly as possible, that's a great example where perhaps it was the procurement person who didn't understand it, and now the service people have inherited it. And that's why I say about at least understanding what a workflow is very important.
Okay, thank you. And to finish off, if you had to pick one thing that was key to successful agile thinking, what would that be?
I would definitely start with the word culture. I appreciate that's a very expansive and wide topic, but it's if your culture doesn't support learning, struggles with failure, that's a finger pointing exercise rather than an opportunity. If you haven't got teams that you're trusting, and those teams don't understand that they're being trusted, then yes, you may be able to deliver in iterations, and you'll certainly go from beginning to end of a project and feel a little bit like you're doing some kind of agile. But at the point that you start trusting and enabling people, there's quite exciting things that happen on the other side. There are a number of projects that we've run where we want to go in X, Y, Z direction, and we're going to deliver these things. The team has delivered something slightly different, often better than we expected, or they're bringing out functionality sooner than we expected, because they've effectively got the space to think. We're all driven by the same thing. We all want the company to be successful, so why not arm them with the right information to be successful?
Brilliant. Thank you very much. If you've got a few moments, Stephen, I'm going to throw this open to the folks who are on the call. If you want to throw in some questions, either by chat, the chat box is there, or obviously speak up. Is that okay, Stephen?
Yeah, that's absolutely fine.
All right. Any questions out there, folks? Or points, or anything else you want to say?
About changing the culture and about your organization, how long has this journey to the current agile ways of working been, and what was your starting point? Did you create all of this from scratch, or did you go through some kind of painful, long transition to get there? Because I have been dealing with transition and cultural change for more than 10 years, and it's one of the hardest things to do. So can you comment on that?
Yeah, of course, and a very good question. So I think I've had an advantage in some regards in this organization, that we've grown quickly as a company. We're only about 200 heads now, so we're a very small company by some standards for sure. We began working with Agile and taking Scrum into the way that we delivered projects about two and a half years ago. When I talk about having an advantage in here, the starting advantage, at least, because it hasn't been easy all the way, that's for sure. The starting advantage was something of an organizational edict, so to speak. So rather than saying we've got a skunkworks project in a corner which is trying some Scrum, we took 4 quite notable projects at the time and said, okay, let's try this. Let's see if this works. And did it very publicly. So yeah, you've got that. There's always the challenge with change that you get that you can apply a technique to this kind of corner project in a development team somewhere, and even if you're successful, it hasn't got much credibility behind it because it wasn't a very headline important project. In our case, that advantage that I had at the beginning was to say, I've got 4 very visible projects that we were running, and it was very much blind leading the blind at the beginning. We really struggled to understand what we were doing. What we did do, though, was we brought some external consultancy in, not in so much as we didn't know what we were doing and we didn't have some people here, but there's a power in a consultant being kind of distant to be able to talk about what's going wrong and what's going right in here. The main thing that we've been doing really along the way, and the main thing that I've been trying to do along the way, is maintain, like many other kind of change programs, maintain a very clear view of every opportunity, every success that we've had, so that it's quite easy to talk about the project over here that was running for 6 weeks, and then we realized that there wasn't a marketplace for it, so we shut that down. Or the project over here where we've brought in additional value into the solution. If you've got opportunities in your organization to say projects that are running in quite a controlled way, where to my point about uncertainty earlier, you're spending a lot of time resolving uncertainty up front, any evidence that you can bring out. I'm probably not telling you anything new in this, but those little those examples, any bit of data that you can pull out to be able to evidence the fact that by giving the team some space, they provided actually quite a different solution, but a much better one for our customers, or by constraining the team, they missed the target. Any opportunity for that you can get. So in here, I've definitely had that kickback, and I've definitely had some very traditional people in the organization. Some of the members of the leadership team kind of just didn't get it, so to speak, or didn't get what I was trying to do. So I've spent quite a lot of time working with them, at minimum, just to make sure that they understand that in a traditional way, we are still delivering, we are still going forwards.
Thank you. That's really useful. I just want to interrupt you because I've seen another question from Jim Mason, which I think might be useful doing, and I'm just putting it onto the chat box for everybody's benefit. But the question is, how do you make your various review meetings effective and avoid them just ending up being venting sessions?
It's a good question. Good question. There's probably a couple of things in here. So one thing I haven't talked about on the call, actually. So this is, to your point, Jim, that there's definitely in every organisation, everywhere, there are challenges to overcome, and often in a review session, whatever, there's some frustration that comes out. Typically rooted in, we wanted to be further on than we are. Can't believe we're not. So there's a couple of things. One is probably to make the sessions quite specific. So we make sure that there's an opportunity for everybody to talk about technical challenges and technical overlaps, and make sure that that team have got an opportunity to talk about that specifically there, and so on. So being quite, rather than having a general review session where you end up with members of a design team or a software team talking about problems they've got in the lab, or why did we decide to do this in Python, or whatever the challenge is, there's a forum for that, so to speak. The second point, actually, which, as I say, I didn't bring out, was waste. So if anybody's touched any lean kind of thinking, there's a core concept of waste, or managing waste, being aware of the energy that you're putting into things that aren't necessary in the system, so the things that are slowing you down. The change control procedure that's very long-winded and causes problems, or the fact that it takes a long time to get through procurement, which is definitely an issue that we had early on here. The project teams measure that stuff, and as a result of that, there's a flow of information when waste is occurring, the things that are frustrating people often as well, therefore, and are blocking project progress. That flow kind of comes from the project teams and then up into the reviews if it needs to. what has been very important for us organisationally is making sure, and it's very much on me. I've got a whiteboard next to my desk which has got this stuff on it, on the basis I can't get away from that waste. I have to do something about it because I know the pain that it's causing the teams. So effectively, you give people a good way of a constructive way of sharing that challenge, rather than just criticism in a corner.
I think that's a great point, actually, that you have a forum not only for the technical part, but actually the process part, the wastes, and other metadata, if you like, that can be discussed in order to improve the cycle each time.
Yes,
that's great. Thank you very much. Is there anything else from anybody on the call before we close it? Because I'm conscious that we've gone well over our allotted 15 minutes, but that's only because you've been saying entertaining and useful things. Useful things. So thank you to Stephen. Anything else from anyone?
This is Tõnu again. I wanted to ask a bit about this unknown of unknowns and doing the analysis up front for projects. And from my experience, in Agile, usually taking this approach that we'll move as we go, and if you try to do this with big projects with many different parties and complex dependencies, then it always leads to not analyzing enough and down the road exploring and identifying that we have done something completely wrong and we need to go back to the beginning. How do you actually determine this balance in more complex projects with many stakeholders?
Good question. So I'll talk about briefly about some of the controls that we do. So when we commence a project in here, a project doesn't commence with no data at all. It's not a discovery in the first place. So a project that commences here will always have a general, or at least a clear headline design in both technology, process, and so forth. So we'll understand how it fits in with our solutions architecture. We'll understand how it fits into our service. We'll understand the core parts of the supply chain. We're also, because many of the projects that we're talking about here are commercial, we've also got assumptions and so on and so forth that we're making about the market. So we definitely start with a view. It's not a completely emergent design, because I know the kind of thing you're talking about definitely in the past has taken us down perhaps slightly odd routes where we feel like we've done the wrong thing. So I suppose the key point in here, and the key point in any one of those, is visibility and openness. So we have got an initial design, but that's by no means the absolute locked blueprint that we expect the team to deliver on in the end. That's the position that we expect, and we'll test those assumptions along the way. I suppose it really relates to what we've come back to, or I've been talking about throughout. There's an opportunity to see that you're going in the wrong direction.
Okay, we seem to have a... Okay.
I think I was kind of done anyway. Visibility.
Great.
Visibility and people being okay with change, which is easier said than done, perhaps. And I'm conscious of time.
Grand. Well, thank you very much indeed for your questions, and a special thank you to you, Stephen, for turning up early in the morning to talk about your experience with making Agile teams work. It's been enormously valuable. Thanks to everybody for
I've enjoyed
attending.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, everybody, for coming on. Thank you, Andrew. Bye.